Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic video. Live at Film Fanatic headquarters. Hope everyone's doing good. It is Monday at just about 10 o'clock, 9:57. So, yeah, I want to thank everyone for checking out this channel with the new subscribers that have been coming up the last 2 weeks or so. I really appreciate people checking out these videos and chiming in, and also people commenting on the videos, which is really awesome. And there's been a few subscribers that have recommended some really cool and very interesting films, as well as some directors that I haven't heard of before. And that's what it's all about. It's about, the exchange of ideas around all of these awesome movies that I love and that always inspire me personally, but then, musically also. It's a wonderful thing. So I really appreciate the love, because at the end of the day, it's about these movies and maybe bringing a movie that might not have, maybe at one point it had a pretty good audience, but a lot of the times, at least in the movies that I've been coming across and discovering for the first time, and that I have, movies that I've been buying and then movies that I end up doing shows on, these movies are pretty obscure and super underground. And it's awesome. It's a wonderful time. Me being a film fanatic and just a lover of film, just a great time in of discovery. Super awesome. So I really appreciate that. All the love. One of the coolest things too, I just did a show. Speaking of, I think of a good example of that. I just did a show a few days ago on a Tobe Hooper movie called Life Force. And that's one of my all-time favorite, I would consider it a vampire movie. It's definitely a vampire movie. It's a vampires from space, basically, is what it is. And it's centered on this alien invasion from these extraterrestrial vampires. And it is such a awesome movie. I did a show on it a few days ago, and that's one of those movies that I have pretty deep connection to. I remember seeing that movie in the theater. I was like 10 years old. And I often think too of movies that I was exposed to, and certain movies that I was allowed to watch as a really young kid. I don't think, in this day and age, parents would really allow that so much. So I grew up in a special time, in a special place. I've always had a good, rapport with my parents. My parents have always been pretty supportive, but they've always been very open-minded to, letting me see things. But when it came to horror and music that I was into at the time, music that I'm still into, and movies that I'm obviously still into. But when it came to the horror fantasy aspect of a lot of these movies and music, I remember my mom always, we would have conversations because, the music and the imagery, the graphic nature of a lot of that material was very controversial. And I remember, my mom always kind of stressing this idea, or kind of instilling this idea, that it was pure escapism, and that there was a fun aspect to it, and that it was fantasy. It wasn't set in reality, but it was a pure form of escapism. So I don't know. When I was a kid, I always had that distinction. I would see horror films, and I would see, some of the imagery in some of these films, and of course, it's like going to an amusement park. You want that thrill ride, and that's the allure of being a fan of horror. You know, it's like going to that amusement park, and you just don't want it to end. And that's, I feel, is like the core attraction to it for myself and probably for other fans of horror films. And that's one of the reasons I feel even now in this day and age horror is bigger than it's ever been as far as a genre. I mean, you just it's pretty unbelievable. But I remember always as a kid like having that distinction, and a lot of that was due to my mom kind of laying things out that way. But I always, I would of course a lot of those films would scare me and terrify me, give me nightmares, but it was different. I don't know, I really enjoyed that part of it. And I also, but at the same time I could make that distinction where it was the difference between reality versus some super reality, fantasy versus fiction. So that always kept me realizing, or always kept, like, for me having I always had a certain perspective around that. So I don't know, to a degree I felt like at such a young age having that perspective gave me even more of a sense of like enjoyment around that escapist, you know, experience. So, but again, getting back to my original point, the reason, a great example, or probably the best example as to why I do this channel. I did a show on this Tobe Hooper movie, Life Force, which is a movie I never ever hear talked about. I think it's one of the greatest science fiction vampire movies ever. It's a real rare blending of those two genres. It's only been done a few times that I know of, if that. And that movie, I feel like, never gets credibility. I remember the reaction from kind of the public at that time. People didn't know what to think of it because it's such an unusual movie and it's really strange. It's bonkers crazy at times, but there's so much amazing imagination on the big screen when you watch that film. And it doesn't at all, it definitely has those classic moments of the classic, vampire mythology, with the spaceship that's used in that movie that was modeled off of more or less Dracula's castle. Tobe Hooper, there's an amazing package of special features on that disc, and he talks a lot about where he wanted to take things that are part of that mythology around vampires, and particularly around Bram Stoker's original novel Dracula, but he wanted to put it in this very different kind of context. And he talks about how he kind of modeled the idea of like Dracula's castle, that classic set piece, but he wanted to make like a spaceship out of it. And also, like, with the lead vampire, she has these very strong characteristics that I think, for me, harken back to the original novel as far as the characteristics of Dracula. And it always reminded me of Frank Langella's amazing portrayal of Dracula in 1979, which is one of my all-time favorite Dracula movies, and also a movie that I feel is super underrated. And it also reminded me a lot of, or at least her characterization of Dracula reminded me a lot of Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, starring Gary Oldman, where there is these moments of where he's on the screen, where Dracula's character is on the screen, and he just has this incredible presence. And he's frightening, but he's really seductive, and there's not necessarily anything happening. It's just that chemistry and that fire on stage. And the lead actress in Life Force, I feel, really embodies that. So it has that classic vampire, and even going back even further, I think, with Bela Lugosi, and even Nosferatu, even before that. But that classic, that command look that that iconic character of Dracula has always had on screen. She, the lead actress in Life Force, really, I feel, is like a very, well, at least at that time, a very contemporary version of of that um, that presence, but in a very, very, very different, wildly, and also a wildly imaginative setting. But again, I did a show on this movie on Life Force, and again, it's a movie I never see talked about. I never hear about it, and I think it's one of the most underrated movies of all time. I love Toby Hooper, most famous for Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But I was really psyched when I saw today that that reached my review for Life Force, almost reached about 2,000 people. And I'm like, that's why I do this. Like, so, a movie like that might have been forsaken, might not have been appreciated by anyone, might have even bombed at the box office, or, but just never found that audience, or is never talked about, to feel that there's people out there that actually want to talk about this movie or check it out, or getting a communication with people who actually love that film. To me, that's like bringing that spotlight on that film and seeing that there's like, a few thousand people that have checked it out, within a couple of days. That really is gives me a great feeling. So I really, appreciate people showing their support, because that's awesome. And that also just gives me more desire to crank out these videos and talk more and more about these wonderful movies. So thanks again for all of that, and that's something I really hold on to and I really cherish. One of the things that happened, or a couple of things that happened over the weekend, I try to do a video every day, or I usually do a video every day for this page. So, but we had a couple of really big snowstorms this week. We had about 3, and 2 that were very big, and we had one yesterday, or I should say, no, on Saturday we had a really big snowstorm. We had about a foot of snow here. But my internet was down for about 2 days. It just came back this morning. And so I wasn't able to upload any videos. I tried doing it like later in the day. I still went ahead and I recorded some videos. I recorded like 2 videos, and then later in the day, when the storm kind of cleared, but there was still, lots of snow, I guess, on the power lines and whatnot. The internet was like really shoddy, and it kept cutting in and out, so I wasn't able to upload any videos until, so then this morning the connection is back to normal. So I just I uploaded 2 videos that I did yesterday and also on Saturday. I did one on Saturday, and then, or I think, no, wait, I did two videos on Saturday, and I just uploaded them this morning to the channel, so check those out. I did a video on a really awesome, I think one of the greatest slasher movies of all time, Alice, Sweet Alice from 1976, directed by Alfred Stoll. Love that movie to death. I just did a show on that. And then I also did another show of a classic movie, one of my all-time favorites, my favorite ghost story horror films of all time, and that is The Fog by John Carpenter. I love that movie. I came home last night, had a pretty long day. I had some gigs that were scheduled this week, and they both got moved to Saturday. They were both going to be on Saturday, and then originally one was going to be on Sunday, and then I was going to do one on Saturday and one on Sunday, but the weather was too bad that everything got switched to Sunday. So yesterday, I didn't have a chance to upload any videos, but so there's 2 videos up that I just brand new videos that I just put up about these two wonderful movies. So that's one of the things about living here in the big city of Northport is the I don't usually it's gotten way better than it used to be, but every now and then I do have some serious problems with my internet connection here. That was one of the problems why I did away with doing the Facebook live videos, because I found that the whatever the bandwidth that you use for that was really shoddy, and it was really affecting the quality of the videos and the audio and all that crap. So I since I've switched over to doing just this, I don't have any problems anymore because I'm obviously recording the videos just on video, so I'm not having to use the internet, so the quality's better. So yeah, so this today I'm really excited about this show. This is a movie that I actually bought this movie probably about 6 or 7 months ago. I never seen it, and it's one of my favorites, and it's by Lucio Fulci, who is my favorite Italian director, my favorite horror, definitely one of my favorite horror Italian, or definitely one of my favorite horror exploitation directors. Definitely my favorite, hands down, of all of the great Italian directors from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He's always referred to as the maestro, Lucio Fulci, and he was a master filmmaker. Just so many great movies. I've done a few shows on quite a few of his movies that I own. So many movies under his name that he's done for the years, for literally 3 decades. He just put out so many great movies. And I did shows on The New York Ripper, which is just so amazing. The Gates of Hell, another amazing movie, masterpiece. And The House by the Cemetery, which is probably my favorite Lucio Fulci movie of all time. All three of those movies were movies that I used to watch as a kid back in the VHS days. So I was pretty familiar with Lucio Fulci as a kid. He was definitely the first Italian director I ever got exposed to. And then also the other movie, which I can't forget, which I don't own, but at some point I will get, is Zombie, which I think is probably one of the greatest zombie movies, if not the greatest zombie movie of all time. Again, Lucio Fulci, since I've been buying his movies within the last couple of years or last year on Blu-ray, and I've been diving deep into his whole catalog, there's a plethora of movies I've never seen of his. I mean, because his career, like I said, was covered 3 decades, and it's amazing. He's predominantly known as a horror film director, Lucio Fulci, but through my discoveries of him in the last year or two, and really diving deeper into his catalog and who he was as a director, he did many different styles of film. I almost think that he did films that were maybe almost to a degree compared to, say, some of the Giallo films that he's done. He did Western movies. He did some sex exploitation movies. I almost feel like those particular genres or styles are almost make up the majority of a lot of his films compared to his horror selection or his horror catalog. Even though there's a tremendous amount of horror films he directed, he also did many other styles of films. I've discovered, lots of other genres, like particularly the Western genre, which I didn't know he made Western genres or Western oriented films. He also made war movies that took place during World War I and World War II. He also made lots of Giallo films. He also made some early, like, sex exploitation movies. So, but overall, he's probably more well known for his horror films because of the levels of how sleazy a lot of these films were, how graphic they were, how he just created these really incredible, haunting images on the big screen. Just amazing. But this is a film that I've always heard about. I had never seen it up until I saw this about, like, again, I bought this about five or 6 months ago. This was a movie I had always heard about, and I had always heard from people that this film was like one of his greatest movies. And I finally bought it on Blu-ray, and this is also on Mondo Macabro, which I've talked a lot about before in previous shows, being that Mondo Macabro is my favorite exploitation label. They just have one of the most incredible selections that I've ever seen. So I've been buying most of the movies I own right now on Blu-ray, or I would say the majority of them are Mondo Macabro, I keep keep snagging them up every time I see them in the store, and they're all just amazing. The majority, well, pretty much all of the films that I've seen on Mondo Macabro are all first time viewings for me. So I take a chance, and every time, without question, I'm blown away by each movie I bought. And the level of diversity on the label is just amazing. So I finally bought this, and this is a Lizard and Woman's Skin. A Lizard and Woman's Skin, directed by Lucio Fulci. And this movie is just amazing, like absolutely incredible. It came out in 1971, which is so unbelievable. And this is definitely like more of a giallo film. It's got horror elements to it. And overall it's labeled as a horror giallo film, whereas it's and I've talked a lot about what giallo is. Giallo is like an Italian style. It's a very specific style that came out of Italy. And basically it's the Italian version of, or their take on the kind of the classic English Agatha Christie murder mystery genre, where there's a lot of suspense, there's a lot of interesting plot twists, there's always this real investigative element to the film, and essentially they're mystery films. And it's a very distinct and very unique style. And the Italians created that style. And Lucio Fulci was very much a part of that whole world. He was one of the creators of the giallo films and that style. It's such an awesome style, and especially what I love about it is it reminds me, not only it has that classic Agatha Christie kind of murder whodunit aspect to it, or kind of aesthetic, it also has a very Alfred Hitchcock kind of vibe to it. There's a lot of suspense. There's a lot of real interesting plot twists and turns. And I'm especially a fan of when that giallo style is fused with the horror genre. Where you combine elements of gore or elements of the supernatural. Or in another characteristic of a lot of the giallo films is there's always some kind of slasher element a lot of the times, where you typically see the gloved killer. They'll show the killer on screen, but you'll only see his hands, and he has like the leather gloves, or he's doing something and he's going after somebody. That's a typical thing that you see. But this movie is a total trip. It's like an acid trip. It's super psychedelic too. That's the other thing about this movie that is so interesting and so unique from any of his other films, is just how it's like a full-on hallucinatory experience. You feel like you've done copious amounts of drugs when you watch this film. Basically, the story is centered on this woman who is tormented by these strange drug-induced hallucinations, where she has these wild fantasies that involve murder, sex, conspiracy. But over time, these visions that she has, this character, the main character, these things become reality. And they kind of manifest over time into where these crimes and these acts are actually being committed. And it's super fascinating. It's one of the greatest out of all of the great Lucio Fulci movies that there is. I think that this is one of the most well crafted suspense stories. I mean, it's great, and the visuals is just mind boggling. I mean, again, it's such a hallucinatory experience. You feel like you're watching a watching a movie on mushrooms, or you've taken some acid. I mean, it's just wild. And it came out in 1971. The music was composed by Ennio Morricone, the great and legendary Italian composer, who is probably most well known for all of the amazing spaghetti westerns, all of his work and collaborations with Sergio Leone. And he did this film score with this. And I'm not sure if Ennio Morricone did any other films for any Lucio Fulci movies. I'm not aware of offhand. There probably is. I'm sure there's probably some other films, but I was unaware that they worked together. So that was another extra bonus, because Ennio Morricone is one of my favorite composers of all time, and so it was, just a match made in heaven for me. And again, getting back to Lucio Fulci, who, I feel like you can never say enough good things about. Just amazing. The list of movies that he created during his career is just staggering. Zombie, which came out in 1979, The Beyond, 1981, The House by the Cemetery, of course, which came out in 81, also City of the Living Dead, or Gates of Hell, 1980, The New York Ripper, 1982, Don't Torture a Duckling, which came out in 72, Zombie 3, 88, this film here, A Lizard in Woman's Skin, 1971, The Psychic, 77, A Cat in the Brain, 1990, one of his later films. He also did a version of The Black Cat in 1981, White Fang in 1973, The Smuggler in 1980, Demonia, which is a movie I really love. It's one of his later films. I have that on Blu-ray. I'm going to eventually do a show on that. Dangerous Obsession, 1986. Murder Book in 1984. Manhattan Baby. Touch of Death, 1988. Beatrice Cenci, 69, even older than this film. Conquest, 1983. A movie I did a review on, which I really love, which is one of his like classic sci-fi movies. Warriors of the Year 2072, which is such an awesome movie, like this really great, over-the-top, post-apocalyptic movie. I did a review on that movie a few months ago. Challenge to White Fang, 74. Four of the Apocalypse in 75. The Senator in 1972. And then, like I said in the beginning of the show, he also did some westerns, and this is one of his westerns, which I've never seen. There's so many of his movies I haven't seen. It's just wild. Silver Saddle, which came out in 78. The House of Clocks is 1989. Voices from Beyond in 91. I mean, just amazing. The Sweet House of Horrors in 1989. Howlers of the Duck, 1960. And you're going back, when you go back to his early part of his career, like the early 70s, like this, A Lizard in Woman's Skin is wicked old. It's like 71. I find when you start at that point and you trace the lineage even further back, he really was knee deep in doing all of these, full-on giallo films. I think this might have been the first film where he started fusing horror with the giallo style. The Thieves in 1959, like, it's crazy. It's crazy. The Red Monks, 1989. I mean, so you're talking a director who made films in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Like, unbelievable. And, you know, all those movies I just mentioned, there's a lot of those I haven't seen. But it's amazing how many genres that he jumped, he jumped all the time from genre to genre. I mean, you have westerns, you have the giallo films, you have the horror films, you have the sex exploitation films, just just all this stuff. Pretty unprecedented, and such a prolific director. One of my favorites. Another director that I really love that I feel is kind of right up there, almost with Lucio Fulci, is Jess Franco. Jess Franco, kind of a similar thing for me growing up. There were a few of his films that I saw as a kid. I recently been buying quite a few of his films, and I love them to death. But at the time, I didn't really know who Jess Franco was. And he was a Spanish director, and he was one of the greatest exploitation directors, and also one of my favorite directors of all time, along with Lucio Fulci. They, and again, the amount of movies that he made and is staggering, and how prolific. Sometimes 2 movies a year. Same thing with Lucio Fulci. The work ethic of these guys was just unbelievable, and I think it was due to obviously they shot their films for with really really small budgets, and it was really the emphasis was like on this like guerrilla style filmmaking. So they would make out these, they were exploitation directors, so they were cranking out movies left and right. But it's something to be commended, that, and it really just demands respect on how many films these guys put out. Particularly since I'm talking about Lucio Fulci, how many movies these guys that he put out, where it spanned 3 or 4 decades. I mean, just wild. Now I know it's a very different thing. It's hard to compare, but now it's like you have a lot of directors now that there's sometimes 5 years between each movie. And I mean it's wild, like how prolific these guys were. And when it comes down to it, even though they're quote unquote not Hollywood movies, or they were kind of sleazy, low budget pictures, and they're a lot of the times not given legitimacy by the industry, but the amount I find the quality of their work, everything I've come across and things I've been discovering, is unbelievable. They're just amazing. And the amount of work that they put in their careers, and how prolific they were, and I think that automatically puts these guys on this big giant pedestal, because that's one thing I don't see now is with filmmakers is, and I know from the experience that I've had working in a little bit in in films and trying to direct films, I realize it is the hardest. I think it's the hardest artistic endeavor most complex artistic project that one can be involved in, because you're multitasking at such a high level on everything, from your editing, the editing process, to directing the film, the cinematography, to the production design, the practical effects, the music, getting the right actors, the script writing, the marketing, I mean, the lighting, I mean, just endless amounts of things that you have to worry about. And you have these directors that when they're putting out these movies, they're wearing like 10 to 20 different hats every day. And they're constantly in this process of trying to get their vision on screen, but they're also trying to problem solve constantly, and having to worry about so many things that are in so many different departments of that film, and it's unbelievable. So to see that these guys made so many movies, knowing how hard it is to make films, it's unbelievable, and it just gives me a whole new found respect for these guys. But This movie, yeah, I highly recommend this, and I think this is a really great movie that could be like, say, an introduction to Italian exploitation movies, because even for people who are not necessarily into horror films and maybe they get freaked out by it, this definitely has horror elements, but it's such a great mystery, and it's such a, like I said, it's such an intense psychedelic. It's such a psychedelic experience, this movie, that I think that this is a good, like, kind of introduction to how powerful and how entertaining these movies are. I watched this film with a friend who is not at all really into horror, and she has a real low threshold for horror, and gore and violence and things like that really bother her immensely. And we watched this together, and even though, like I said, this does have, it very much has horror elements, she really loved this movie, and she thought it was just wild, and she totally dug it. So that's why I think that this would be a really great kind of introduction to, well, Giallo, but classic Italian filmmaking. It's just amazing. So yeah, 1971, A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, and this is part of the Mondo Macabro label. Amazing, amazing stuff here. There's so many great special features on here as well. They always, all of the Mondo Macabro releases have just tremendous special features on each disc. Just so awesome. So yeah, this is Jason Dean. So please check this movie out. What else can be said about the maestro Lucio Fulci? He's the greatest. So thanks again for checking out these videos. And I'm going to be signing off now. So have a great day. Peace.